Hello, everyone. So this is an interview with Professor Andrei Makarichev, visiting professor at Johann Skytte Institute of Political Studies, Tartu University in Estonia. The interview is one of the series that the Latvian Transatlantic Organization is doing as part of the preparation for the next Riga conference that's coming this fall. Professor Makarichev has had a lot of international exposure, participated in numbers of projects with outstanding Western universities and institutions, among others, Institute for East European Studies at the Free University of Berlin, Jagiellonian University in Krakow, Copenhagen Peace Research Institute, Danish Institute for International Studies, and others in Europe and North America. Professor Makarichev's research interests lie in the area of international relations, politics, national minorities, populism, borderlands, quite a diverse field. Please correct me, Professor, if I'm mistaken, please.
That's true.
Yeah, and I will introduce myself briefly. I'm vice chair of the board of the Baltic to Black Sea Alliance, which means I'm interested in the complicated area between the two or even three seas. My academic background is in theory of literature, and my journalistic and political career is closely tied to Latvia's fight for independence. I was a member of the parliament that voted for restoration of independence on May 4th, 1991, almost exactly 31 years ago. And for almost 20 years, I represented NDI, National Democratic Institute of the United States of America, in various countries of the former USSR, in Russia, Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia, Azerbaijan, and Belarus. I'm sure we're going to have an interesting talk. And then my first question, Professor, what is wrong with Russia? Why suddenly, instead of thinking of the well-being of its people, Russia's leadership is pursuing an openly aggressive policy towards its neighbors?
Well, this is a long story, but to cut it short, as you probably want me to do, I would say that at a certain point, I don't know when exactly it happened, but at a certain point, the collective Kremlin understood that within the framework of liberal and explicitly normative international order, I would like to underscore liberal and normative, Russia does not really have a space for its agency as agencies understood in Russia. And this is true. To be a part of liberal normative international order, you need to be able to adjust your policies to the shared norms and principles that the core members of this society would accept and would consider the most important, which also implies some domestic changes, that also implies some homework. I mean, there is nothing strange or humiliating in the whole idea of learning from others rather than teaching others. And what is the most important within this argument is that Russia would need to definitely, to be able to be considered as an equal part of this order, very seriously and very meaningfully change the way how political institutions in Russia would function, which basically would mean that at a certain point, Russia would face a clear necessity to become more open, more democratic, less repressive, less corrupt, etc. It basically means that all key elements of the current Putin's regime would need to be drastically reconsidered. And that's exactly what Putin is very hesitant to do, because he understands that ultimately Russia's integration with the liberal normative order would mean the end of Putin's regime as it exists.
Do you think that that Putin thinks in these terms? Do you think that he sort of understands that, oh, we have to be more democratic, and it doesn't work for me, so I will be you know, aggressive instead of democratic? And what is the thinking behind these changes in policies?
Well, the thinking is that, well, there is some kind of rational type of thing, at least some attempts to rationally project, again, this potential and now almost unrealistic integration of Russia with this liberal international society into domestic area. And I think the Kremlin is able to calculate the risks for the regime that exists as a result of this integration. And that's why they are wrapping up all possible forms of interaction, communication, and cooperation, be it on the level of state to state or on the level of public diplomacy or people's diplomacy. So within this framework of thinking in the Kremlin, all kind of opening to the external world are by definition considered as detrimental and potentially dangerous. So that's the type of thinking. But I would also like to make an argument that I don't think that the Kremlin considers its policy as aggressive. That's a trick. They do think, and this is also a result of this indoctrination of a nation that is allegedly encircled by, you know, enemies or, let's say, foes. They do believe in the story that they created for themselves, that we are just protecting ourselves, we are defending. That's the other part that is always a kind of trespassing this invisible lines, and we are just defending ourselves. And that's how they can sell this story to the Russian society, because I don't think that most of the people in Russia, they understand that this type of behavior is definitely considered as aggressive beyond Russian borders. They just don't understand this.
Professor, I would like you to sort of stay on this point a little bit longer. So, does Putin, the president of Russia, believe into this story that Russia is surrounded by enemies who want to destroy it? Or is it a story created to sell to the Russian people in order to raise his popularity?
I think it's not only about popularity, it's about regime survival. I think Putin was highly impressed by, let's say, a destiny of some other leaders who have been removed from their positions, from their offices. And I do think that he, in his vision, he kind of extrapolates the same situation upon Russia. And in this sense, again, I do believe that within this framework of this story, Putin thinks that he is defending, he is protecting himself. And that's exactly where the point of disagreement starts. Whether he believes, I mean, sincerely and frankly, in the fact that most of Russian neighbors, and not only neighbors, partners, are inherently unfriendly. Well, frankly speaking, I don't know, but whether it matters or does it matter, I think he needed this story, and he got this story as the dominant discourse in Russia. And this is something which can be easily instrumentalized, that which can be easily transformed into kind of a narrative that might have some audiences in the West, but also definitely has huge audience in Russia, within Russia. So in this sense, yes, the story was created for the sake of regime survival. And well, I think some of them, they do believe in this story. Some of them know perfectly well that this is just a product of well, relatively narrow circle of experts and media personalities that just spread this story across the country.
Thank you. It's a very important point. Thank you very much. But how much support do you think this kind of thinking has among Russia's citizens? Is it really working? Do they? I know the statistics, of course, and polling and so on, but I'm always a little bit skeptical about polling in post-Soviet countries because people have a habit of lying when asked questions by strangers. So what are the figures? What are your estimates? How much support do these policies have?
Well, I don't have any figures at my disposal, and I think that all figures in Russia, well, they should be taken with some kind of critical assessment, as any numbers and any statistics coming from there. But what I know, based on my acquaintance with different discourses and narratives that are produced within Russian society, well, I would say that the picture is very mixed. Again, it's not about numbers; it's about, let's say, some trends in the public opinion. But I would claim that this version of this interpretation, oversimplified and definitely adjusted to domestic consumption, it might have a majority of Russians, I mean, who would believe in this story. I'll just give you one example. None of Russian opposition leaders, so those who are considered as anti-Putin crusaders in the West, none of them clearly and lucidly recognize that Crimea is a part of Ukraine. Even Alexei Navalny is kind of, well, I would say ambiguous on this issue. It basically means that there is no way to seriously come to power in Russia for someone who would include into her or his agenda a clear promise to return Crimea to whom this territory belongs. And again, even the liberal opposition in Russia is intentionally very uncertain on this point, which basically means that within the public opinion, well, unfortunately, there is no space which would be significant enough to build political strategies, a space that would be grounded in the presumption that what has been done needs to be redone. And this is unfortunate, of course. That means that, of course, we can speak about post-Putin Russia, and we can speak about succession and other important issues. But so far, unfortunately, I don't see a political role for someone, again, who would start campaigning with this, with something which is clear for most of the people, let's say, in Europe, beyond Russia, but which still remains not that clear, to say the least, in Russia.
Thank you. Now, why Ukraine? Why is this fixation with Ukraine that seems to be present in the Russian politics? Why there seems to be something irrational about this sort of focus on Ukraine in Russia, or am I mistaken?
Well, of course, it depends on how we understand rationality, but
Yes.
my comparison would be, well, I take quite seriously the idea of force-based hegemonic masculinity as a characteristic that defines political culture in Russia. And this idea at a certain point transformed into the idea of, let's say, you know, a big family of which Ukraine is a part. So this legitimation of the concept of the family, which is not only part of domestic discourse, no, it also spills over Russian borders. And again, this concept, which has nothing to do with international law, which has nothing to do with political rationality, the way how it might be understood in political science, but it does have some kind of appeal, again, within Russian ruling elite and within Russian society. So basically, the idea of bringing Ukraine back in one way or another is a part of this hegemonic masculinity. In this role identity, role play, Russia plays this self-ascribed role of an elder brother, and Ukraine is always feminized. It's a sister that just, you know, needs to be somehow taken back to the family, to where the sister belongs. And frankly speaking, the roots of this doctrine, that might look very weird from the outside, but the roots of this doctrine in the Russian dominant culture, I would say they are quite, unfortunately, quite strong. And that's why many rational arguments, they just do not work. In this sense, I completely agree with you that when you start, for example, talking or speaking the legal language, using the concept of international law, internationally recognized borders, etc. The counter argument that it's most likely that you would listen from the Russian side would be completely irrational, something like, oh, but Crimea always belonged to us, which again has nothing to do with the legal framework and the normative framework that the European countries and the European Union tries to adhere to. So in this sense, it's like, you know, two different language register, two different narratives that do not have, you know, chances for producing like a common denominator. So in this sense, I remain quite pessimistic about this idea of common frame or common denominator. Russia will always speak a different language.
Thank you. But judging by the Russian, especially state media, and also many Russian politicians, Ukrainians have do not have a constant, stable role or stable image. It keeps changing, and sometimes it may change within like one sentence. And so Ukrainians may be non-existent. There is no Ukraine, it's a non-existent nation. They can be fascists. So they don't exist, but they're fascists. They are our brotherly nation at the same time, fascist and non-existent, but brotherly nation. And as you said, sister that needs to be brought back to family, which presupposes that the sister has strayed away from the family, done something wrong, you know, like has the wrong kind of acquaintances and friends. How do you explain this kind of plurality of the image of Ukraine and Ukrainians in the Russian public space?
I would explain it through the concept of a very traumatic experience of kind of losing Ukraine. It's again for the dominant discourse in Russia, it's like losing, or even worse, being betrayed by someone who is very, or whom you consider very close to you. And I think all this, you know, a variety of different interpretations, and I agree that it looks, especially at a distance, it looks like a blend of all possible arguments just, you know, put together. And I think this betrays, first of all, a lack of one single narrative. And this also betrays a kind of a sense of traumatic helplessness or traumatic self-realization that in fact what happened already happened, and there is very little you can do with that. It's like it's like a narrative of abandoned husband who faces a problem of accepting the reality, and who might use different, let's say, different narratives from I love you to I hate you simultaneously. And if I beat you, it's exactly because I love you. It betrays a traumatic part of this, you know, split or divorce. And from let's say psychologists or even psychotherapists, we know that, well, to accept something which is traumatic, you just need time. You just need a more, you know, calm kind of structure of relations, so that you would accept it. And only based upon this acceptance, you can build more or less rational strategies. Unless you accept it, all your strategies would be unrational or irrational. And in this sense, what is happening, what is going on in this, you know, multiple narratives, I think is just a very good illustration of this point. And of course, what we did not mention before, but I think it's also quite important, the complex of an imperial or colonial power that is still part of the Russian discourse. And I think in this sense, one of the academic frames that might be used for understanding how relations of hierarchy are being reproduced after the formal fall of the empire, well, we might need to look more specifically and attentively at post-colonial literature, post-colonial theory, which discusses exactly what we are discussing right now. And since you have a literature background in literature, you might also confirm that post-colonial, you know, type of thinking left many interesting imprints in cultural and art studies and in the literary studies as well. So that's exactly what the post-colonial paradigm tries to explain, how relations of domination, hierarchy are cropping up years, if not decades, after the fall of empire. Why would it happen? And why would the former imperial center have so much trouble in accepting the reality? It's like, you know, phantom pains about something which already does not exist. Again, I think some medical analogies here might be appropriate. It's like, I mean, after an amputation of certain part of the body, people, again, as I know from medical literature, might feel this phantom pain. I mean, something which is already gone. You kind of you think that it hurts. So I think this again brings me back to the idea of very traumatic reaction to what happens from the Russian part.
Yes, I actually I have heard this this said by my friends when Latvia became independent. You know, my friends in Moscow said that the feeling is as if your wife has walked out on you. You know, like even the you know, they laughed themselves at this feeling, but that was the feeling they had. I think they were true about it. They didn't lie. So we see that there is a lot of irrationality, of almost mysticism about these sources of Russian policies, but they have to be rationalized when papers are written, when when the objectives of policies are set. This has to be, and probably is, somehow objectivized and put into rational words. So what do you think are the objectives of Russian policies regarding Ukraine? As they are, as they are explained to by foreign minister, by Minister of Defense, to his deputies and to the ambassadors.
Well, I don't think that there is one single answer to this question. At least I have two. One answer would be that the Kremlin clearly understands that Ukraine is lost for imperial, let's say, type of relations. And I don't think that Russia is ready for any other type of relations with Ukraine in one way or another, with the soft hierarchies or even with hard hierarchies. So I think, and I tend to agree with this explanation, is that Putin, let's say collective Putin, realizes quite clearly that there is no way to bring Ukraine back into the family, that it's gone, but as a small compensation for this wounded national, pride or sense of agency, they decided to annex Crimea and to start a war by proxy in Donbass. Again, knowing that this is just a small compensation for the loss of 90 and something % of Ukrainian territory. That, I mean, politically, not in a material sense, of course. And the second explanation, which is, I think, much more far-reaching, is that Putin did not accept the reality that still whatever he does is about bringing the sister back in one way or another, if necessary by force. And what we are seeing with annexation and with the war in Donbass is just elements of a much broader or longer chain of actions that Moscow might undertake. So in this sense, I mean, these are two different interpretations. And frankly speaking, I'm not sure whether there is one sole explanation even in the Kremlin. I think that it might be quite imaginable from my perspective that they are kind of vacillating between these two options. Either, okay, let's take at least a bit and then accept that, yes, all the rest is not ours anymore in any possible way. Or the other way around, let's be patient and systemic, and let's destroy all the pro-European aspirations of Ukraine, so that create the conditions for, again, for, let's say, bringing up the whole country to the Russian sphere of influence.
Which of the two strategies will win, do you think, or will it continue? Will they continue vacillating between the two? I mean, not so long ago we were afraid that Russia would start an all-out war against Ukraine, and this prospect was extremely worrying. But so it didn't then. I mean, Russia didn't attack Ukraine back then. Will it attack? Is it part of the strategy, part of the policies? Is it possible? For many of us, this is something unthinkable. But is it unthinkable for President of Russia to start an all-out war with Ukraine?
Okay, but there are only few people in the world who can give, let's say, an answer to this question. And believe me, I do not belong to this small group.
But what do you think? What
Yeah,
are the options?
all what I'm thinking, what I can say is of course highly speculative, and it's just based on my my academic studies and my interpretation of the logic or different logics of Russian foreign policy. Well, my interpretation is that Putin did not want to start anything, let's say, consequential. I'm sure that the structure of, let's say, relations with major European partners seems to be quite okay. For Putin, he has a perspective of meeting Biden. He has a kind of relatively weak reaction from Europe to, let's say, clear cases of political disrespect of the European Union during Joseph Borrell's visit and the other incidents in Czech Republic, in Bulgaria, etc. So in this sense, I think, but again, this is based on my interpretation of the information that is available openly. I think he has what he wanted. I think that he is trying to adjust Russian foreign policy to the existing structure, in which some elements of the Cold War would be definitely observable. But in the meantime, he would be able to strike a balance between having some kind of relations with the United States, again, resembling a Cold War type of communication, and a Europe that is, again, in Putin's view, divided. And I think he believes in his ability to foster and enhance those divides within Europe. And frankly speaking, well, that's what might happen, because yes, we know that almost next day after unsuccessful Borrell's visit, Finnish Minister of Foreign Affairs went to St. Petersburg. Of course, I'm not speaking about cases of explicit disagreement with the EU policy, but we always have this in the European Union, these different levels of diplomacy that might be politically exploited by the Kremlin. Or, for example, let's take the most recent developments, how many EU and NATO member states did display their solidarity with the Czech Republic on the case of expelling Russian diplomats. It's not even 1/2, to the best of my knowledge. So in this sense, I think Putin does see some perspectives for political game rather than for a military campaign. Yes, I think that he understands that a military campaign against Ukraine would destroy everything. And instead of, let's say, playing on these differences and distinctions within the EU, he would have a much more united European Union and much more united NATO. Is it exactly what he wants? I don't think so. So, as my good colleague Sergei Medvedev from Moscow mentioned a couple of weeks ago, the product that Russia tries to export now has a name which is different from oil or even from vaccine. It's fear. And I tend to agree that Russia is producing fear as a political capital, as a political product, as something that might be instrumentalized. Russia is definitely exerting psychological pressure. Even here in Estonia, I mean, what happened just a couple of days ago, different cases of violation of Estonian airspace by Russian jet. Of course, there is nothing new in that, But if you put it as an element in a longer chain of developments, definitely you have a feeling that it's a creation of an atmosphere of a fear and uncertainty that Russia is investing its resources.
But it seems that it's more like a tactical game rather than trying to achieve a certain objective. And it doesn't really put Russia anywhere. It sort of, it puts temporarily. Huh?
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree.
I mean, temporarily it puts Russia at the table with many important speakers, but it doesn't secure its place there because of the economy and because it's just because of fear.
Absolutely, it's more like a tactical instrument that might help to, to balance some other losses that are evident to me because of a unified EU policy on sanctions that Russia most likely did not expect. And in this sense, I do agree that Russia is not getting too much. If you look at the situation objectively and neutrally, well, you can see that, well, Donald Trump is not in the White House. Marine Le Pen is not the president of France. AfD in Germany most likely will not have a great deal of power after the next parliamentary election in Germany. And even having countries with very clearly pro-Russian politicians, like in Czech Republic at the head of the presidency, still Zeman can do almost nothing when it comes to specific cases of investigation and expulsion of diplomats, etc. And other, let's say, very Russia-friendly politicians like Viktor Orban in Hungary, well, they might play in different games with Russia, with China, but they systematically vote for prolonging sanctions. So in this sense, most of the this pro-Russian sympathies that have been talked about for years, well, they are either more or less symbolic, like Matteo Salvini with a T-shirt with Putin's portrait in the Red Square in Russia. Okay, but even he is not anymore Minister of Interior in Italy. So in this sense, I think those investments that were part of Russian strategy of having its own circle of friends, I don't think that they, again, the strategy is quite, well, rational to some extent, but it does not bring any palpable fruits so far. And the same also goes for Russian positions in the so-called near abroad. If we look objectively, what happens there? Well, Kazakhstan is slowly, basically in the cultural sphere, is slowly but quite steadily trying to distance itself from this, imperial interpretation of Eurasian Economic Union through Latin graphics in local alphabet and many other, let's say, more cultural but still very important move. Then you have a Belarus that is more a problem than an asset for Russia today. And I think you had only president of Tajikistan who paid a visit to Moscow to attend the major element in this Russian symbolic universe, which is the 9th of May. And frankly speaking, observing how Putin and his colleague from Tajikistan are, marching. Well, exactly, it's not what Putin would expect at his, let's say, major event of this new Russian mythology. And if you look to other, let's say, places in the post-Soviet space, well, Armenia, being a Russian military ally, lost a war to Azerbaijan, which is not part of Russia, whatever, protected military ally. Again, it's not something dramatic. Each of these episodes might, be taken quite, neutrally. But if you look at all of them as one set of developments, I don't see any breakthroughs in even in the so-called near abroad. So in this sense, well, I hope that the rational part of the Kremlin at a certain point would understand that this strategy has its name, and the name is isolation. And if they want to play this game, okay, they might have some resources for that. But I'm not sure that such, let's say, highly performative actions like, for example, sending Russian paramilitary brigade to Italy last spring to help Italy and to come back to Europe as a savior country, as a country which is well-intended and friendly and helpful. I don't think these are episodic actions. They might have some media effect, as it was the case with this mission to Italy. But strangely enough, this positive effect evaporates very fast, and it does not leave any institutional or other traces. So in this sense, yeah, I would say that this strategy, even if it might have some, explanations, investments do not give the expected results.
Yes, my feeling is that maybe if these tactical gains and these tactics of special operations, bringing discord in the in the European Union and so on, that they might be successful given a very long period of time. But does Russia have this time? What is the future of this regime? What is the future of Putin? How many years he has as leader of Russia? What are the tendencies of development in Russia? What is your feeling?
Well, again, my feeling is that Russia, I think, needs some time to understand. I mean, the ruling elite in Russia, they maybe need some time to understand that their resources are not endless, and that what they are doing again is not strategic. It's basically tactical maneuvering, some episodic actions with no systemic background. Well, even but I think that, well, there are some kind of glimpses of hope. For example, I was surprised to find out that some of Russian think tankers who are quite close to the Kremlin at the peak of the pandemic, they came up with the conclusion that it's very likely that in a post-pandemic world is going to be bipolar. And sorry to say, Russia is none of these poles. That is going to be US-China world. So these, I mean, kind of elements of rational thinking, from time to time, they appear if you attentively read what is being published. And I would agree that in a post-pandemic world, Russia does not have any chance to play in Premier League. That Russia will need to again readjust its policy to a new bipolarity, and that's exactly what Putin previously wanted to disprove. He wanted to position Russia at the level of Stalin, Roosevelt, and Churchill, just sitting together and deciding the future of the world, and using these spheres of influence and the concert of great powers, all those metaphors. No, now some people do understand that that this might not be the case. So in this sense, I think that, let's say, a more sober appraisal and assessment of Russian potential is to come. When, I don't know. But those people who define Russian foreign policy and domestic policy as well, let's admit it, they are not, let's say, that much part of the everyday life, of the everyday routine of the remaining millions of Russians. These people are very wealthy. their understanding of what is going in the society is mediated by many filters.
Mm-hmm.
So that's also something that we need to take into account. The thing that Putin and his major advisors are browsing internet, spaces for looking for alternative explanations, or for looking for, let's say, something that might disprove their pre-existing conception. I think this is typical for groupthink, a phenomenon which is widely known for foreign policy analysis. And I think that's exactly what happens in Russia. This is quite a coherent cohort of people who share a lot with each other, and they feel quite comfortable. So far, they feel quite comfortable within this bubble that they have artificially created for each other. And they are under, I'm sure that they are under impression that Russia is doing relatively well, that Russia is quite wealthy, that Russia can survive even this isolation, that Russia has resources, that Russia would never face some kind of really serious domestic opposition. So again, they created a narrative for themselves, and within the framework of this narrative, they feel quite comfortable, quite convenient.
But is it realistic? What you've just said, is that true? That Russia is doing okay, that that there is no opposition, that they can continue, I don't know, for 20, 30 years like they are now?
Exactly, but this is the question that I'm trying to somehow resolve for myself. Russia is definitely moving not only to reproducing the structure of the Cold War, but also to reproducing the culture of the Cold War with this, isolationist mentality and an artificially created feeling of being or obsession of being encircled by enemies, etc. Well, the most irrational part of this story is that we do know how the Soviet Union ended. I mean, we do know the end of the story. It's like, reading a detective story, but what's the end? You know how it will end. So something prevents the Kremlin from accepting that if you move in this direction, it's going to be next 1991, sooner or later. If you intentionally reproduce the same structure of relations that buried your predecessor, and you intentionally seem to invest in that. So it's not like something that happens. No. It's something that Russia designs for its comfort. This is the most irrational part. Why do they think that they have more chances for survival than the Soviet Union? And the Soviet Union had much more allies. Well, I don't mean the last years of the Soviet Union, but if you look at the Soviet Union as a global power, so the Soviet Union had more chances to survive than Russia today, I think, including resources, including an ideology. Of course, ideology was losing its importance, but still, Russia does not have those privileges. And they still think that they can replay the game. Okay, we lost the first match, we lost the first game, but we're insisting on a replay, and we definitely know that we'll defeat you in the second round. That's what I think, in my view, looks much less comprehensible.
Thank you very much, Professor. It was very interesting to talk to you and to listen to you. And I think that that we have many insights into the situation, and especially into the thinking and strategies and tactical approaches of the Russian elites analyzed by you. And I think we have a much better understanding of it now. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot for inviting me, and thanks a lot for good words.
Thank you.
And maybe see you next time.
I hope so. Thank you.